All right, so this panel discussion is Transformative Representation, Strategies for Recruiting and Retaining BIPOC Library Staff. And we have three lovely panelists here today. We have Dr. Kawanna Bright from East Carolina University, who is part of their School of Library Science. We have Dr. Mónica Colón-Aguirre, who is at the University of South Carolina. I am terrible at rolling my R's, so I'm very sorry. And then Christina Settle, who is the Senior Library Manager for Staffing and Operations at Wake County Public Libraries in Raleigh. And what we're going to do is start off things a little bit differently. So Kawanna and Mónica will share the preliminary results of their study on BIPOC representation in the library workforce. So I'll have them take it away.
Thank you so much, Devin. It's an absolute honor to be here with you today, and an honor to be on this panel with both Mónica and Christina. And we appreciate the time to just give you a brief overview of the study, because it was so relevant to this topic that we thought it'd be interesting for you to hear some of the early results that we're getting. So what Mónica and I are working on, along with Dr. Amy Van Scoy and Dr. Sunha Kim, and also Ayana Crabtree, a grad student at Buffalo, was a study to try to understand when BIPOC librarians were leaving the field. So what was really causing them to leave? Could we identify the points using something called survival analysis? So don't worry, I'm not going to cover survival analysis. That is something Dr. Kim covers for us. But we are doing the study in two phases. Phase one was to do a survey and trying to get people to tell us about factors that we have heard could impact their ability to stay in the field, and also then follow this up with the interviews that Mónica is actually working on right now, leading us to right now. In terms of the survey, I'm not going to give you the full rundown, because when we talk about the amount of data we have right now, it is a little scary, but good in a positive way. We had about 550 people submit what we call usable surveys, so data included on the survey, and almost half, 224, identified as being BIPOC. So that was actually both positive and surprising for us. Usually you don't see that level of survey data coming in. And just in general, most of them, 81.1%, currently still working in the field. About 13%, 72, previously worked no longer in the field. And then we had 31 who had actually never worked in LIS, who received their degrees and just never got a job in LIS. In terms of probably the most important question that we are asking at this point, for those who are no longer working in LIS, why? What had happened to them? And what we were seeing were basically most just pointing out career change. I changed my career. I decided to do something else. A few indicating dependent care, a few indicating personal health issues. You can imagine some of these were during the pandemic that led to this for many of them. A few indicated position eliminated. So no longer have a position to even return to. Only one person said they were laid off, but quite a few also said other. And it was very interesting to see the reasons why they felt they had to leave. Some were more positive. Their career just evolved. I got a new job in a different area. No one's going to be surprised to hear that quite a few said not enough money. They just couldn't pay me enough to continue working in the field. I needed more funds. One person specifically said they requested a disability accommodation. It was denied and ignored. That was enough to get them to leave the field at that point. A few just decided that they felt like they weren't being supported in the field, no opportunities for promotion. So a lot of the things that we were expecting to hear were coming through in terms of the responses here. And Mónica will have actually a little bit more on that, because part of the point of this is to follow up with those interviews. The survey is great. We're getting some data, a lot of quantitative data, some textual data, but people didn't go into essays. They gave a very short description of things. So Mónica, if you'd like to tell us a little bit more about what we're seeing from those surveys, I think it might be useful as well.
Well, thank you so much, Kawanna. So we're in the process of conducting interviews. So far, we have conducted 7 out of a plan of 30. And this was part of an IMLS grant. So that's what we can afford to do 30 interviews. So far we have those 7, out of those 7 participants, 5 identify as BIPOC. That would be Black, Indigenous, or people of color. So far, some very preliminary patterns that I have noticed. I have been present in all the interviews. Kawanna has been in some of them and some of the other researchers, but I've been the one leading this part, so I've been present in all of them. One of the things is that has been pointed out is the change aversion in library, archives, museums, information professions. Many of these LIS professionals were brought in to enact changes, but then they have been given a lot of obstacles to actually do change. So every time they try to change something, there seems to be a big problem with that. And we've seen that. Even one person who decided to leave the profession precisely because they were not given the freedom to do their work to the point that it was reaching the goals. Another thing is that has come out quite often in the interviews is that these librarians are brought in to predominantly white spaces that are not very welcoming to BIPOCs. Most of the interviewees so far have been the only BIPOCs in their department. Maybe not in the full library, but most of them only person in their department. Interestingly enough, a lot of them have mentioned that they don't remember a lot of BIPOCs in library school either. So when they were getting their master's degree, it was likely they were also either one by themselves of their identity of BIPOC, or in a very, very small minority. Another aspect that in these white spaces is that it produces a lot of isolation and the potential for tokenization, because then they're called for every time they need a diverse voice, they're called in and they're feeling a little bit overloaded. Another aspect is the profession is not what many thought it would be. So most of them have started with mentioning their commitment to literacy, to access to information, service provision. However, the work itself right now is described by them as having a lot of role overload, especially during the pandemic. Some librarians have mentioned their job just changed. They were hired for one thing, all of a sudden they're doing contact tracing, or they're doing coordination of vaccinations in their library building, and nothing to do with what they thought they were going to do. So this has created issues with or on top, or some of them mention also these responsibilities on top of what they're doing. And that creates role overload, which is the phenomenon in which the job itself has so many components that the professional is stretched thin. They start to have to work outside of their regular working hours, most of the time with no additional compensation. And another point that has come out is LIS education, which surprisingly to Kawanna and I, because our previous project was actually on LIS education. But many of them find it actually the LIS education they received was sufficient. No complaints about it, especially in online scenarios or cases of online programs. They have been described by most of the participants as actually safe spaces where they feel safe in their identity. Overall, we can see a pattern that libraries have a long way to go to bring true diversity, equity, and inclusion. Participants have mentioned a lot of information that actually matches scenarios of racism at work and in school in some cases, especially microaggressions and gaslighting. Microaggressions and gaslighting are two terms that are used very often in the literature. However, we should not just throw these terms. We need to identify them. And microaggressions, by definition, by Solorzano and Yoso, are subtle, verbal, nonverbal, or even visual insults directed towards people of color. And that is done usually automatically or unconsciously by others. And gaslighting by itself, which is a term that is used a lot nowadays, and it's misidentified a lot, but gaslighting has a meaning. And gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation that hinges on creating self-doubt. So what the participants have described so far, this has been, unfortunately, part of their day-to-day work. And like I mentioned, this is an ongoing project. We've only completed 7 out of planned 30. So we just received another notification. We have a new interview, Kawanna. Yeah, check your email. So eventually we hope to come back with a more full set of data and more results to present to you. But that's what we have so far. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Kawanna and Mónica. Our first question is, how can libraries create more inclusive and equitable recruitment practices to attract a diverse pool of BIPOC library professionals? And we'll have Mónica lead us off for this question.
So this has been one of the big questions in our field. We've always wanted to look for, to recruit BIPOC, but in many cases, you see the question of how do I do that? How do I even do that? It's usually cited as a problem of a pipeline issue, that we don't have enough candidates. We don't think that is the case based on our experiences as educators, Kawanna and I, and also because of what we see in the field. However, one of the things that I would say when it comes to recruitment and of BIPOC is that we need to move outside of the regular, like media, for example, or strategies that we use. One of the things would be whenever there is a position for a librarian or a professional library information professional in your organization, don't go just through the regular Jesse ALA job list. Keep doing that. Those are good. However, to actually gain more targeted groups, go to the actual groups that serve and count with a big membership of BIPOCs in the profession. Here we'd have the BCLA, the Reforma group, the CALA group. So those are specifically targeted towards race. In terms of a conference, the JCLC, so the Joint Caucus of Librarians of Color. Attend, advertise your position there, talk to people in the hallways. Another thing, media, social media groups that we have that are created for people of color. We get a lot of information through there. I know I belong to a few groups and I see a lot of come work with me and things like that. So you usually would need somebody who gains entrance into those spaces. Another thing is intentionally bringing at least one BIPOC individual to interview. That is a strategy a friend of mine, Dr. Lisa Hussey at Simmons University, always mentioned from the NFL. That used to have a problem with Black and African-American coaches. And there was a policy change. You have to bring, whenever there's a job, at least one African-American coach for the job. And that actually broaden the field, because in many cases, BIPOCs are being cut from the race from very early on. Remember those microaggressions I was mentioning? A lot of racist behaviors nowadays is actually unintentional and I forgot the word. That's beautiful. But we're not doing it consciously, subconsciously, sorry. And it's subconscious. So in many cases, even a candidate's name makes it enough for them to be eliminated. So make a point to bring a candidate. Another aspect that derives from the study currently we're doing is actually consider cluster hiring. So if there is more than one position open, make it available to BIPOCs or to actually recruit specifically in the job description, recruit BIPOCs, and don't just do one, do a small group, because that creates an actual community, has a potential to create community. I know I am part of a cluster hire for actual BIPOCs in my field, and it has been useful. I know people already from the get-go. And I can keep going on, but I'm going to pass on the mic to Dr. Kawanna Brown, who has ideas. I can see she has ideas.
I like to talk, so of course I have ideas. Thank you, Mónica. And actually, I want to build on what you said. Most people who know me know I'm an assessment person. So the first thing I'm going to tell you is you need to assess your practices, because part of that assessment is going to show you that you probably have some serious issues happening within the process of reviewing applications, within the process of conducting interviews, as Mónica was mentioning, that are keeping people from even getting to the stage of being interviewed for a position, let alone joining your organization. We have heard a lot about people being required to do the implicit bias training. It's almost standard in most academic libraries now. Not sure about public libraries yet, but there's this element of needing to be at least exposed to the concept of implicit bias and how it leads us to view people in a different way, even if we're not intending to view people in a very different way. If you've never done the implicit association test from Harvard, it's still open for people to participate. It is a study, by the way, so you are participating in a study. You're a guinea pig. But the value of that is that it often exposes even to those of us who feel like we're doing this work that we have biases as well, and that those biases are very much built into how we were raised. I was raised here in the US in the South. I was very much raised to believe that, especially African Americans have a deficit in terms of their abilities and skills, because that's what my school system taught me. Getting over that requires more than just one training, though. So there's this need to go beyond just saying we did the standardized universities implicit bias training, which I'm now required to do almost every other year because, as Monica said, I'm on all the search committees, as many as they can get me on. But I do this training. I don't have to practice for it. I don't have to study for it. You just go do it. You check a box, you move on. It doesn't mean that the person who's completed it actually understands the impact of implicit bias on their actions in that process. So there's a value to reviewing your processes and requiring more than the minimum. Same thing goes for your job applications. More than the minimum is really important in terms of talking about the value of diversity, equity, inclusion at the organization. So you've got your standardized statement that we do not discriminate, which is great. But if that's the extent of what you're asking people for, and you're not asking them to come and be a part of this diverse community and come and participate in this diverse community, and this is what we expect you to do as part of this diverse community, then you're not really setting yourself up to bring other people in and be supported. This is going to sound strange, but sometimes you're not going to be able to identify a BIPOC candidate for your position. That's just the honesty. But you want someone who's supportive of a diverse culture in your organization so that if you do get a BIPOC person, they're supported in the organization. So even if you're not able to identify someone who identifies as BIPOC, you can identify people who are just very supportive of inclusivity, very supportive of equity in the workplace, and want everyone to be engaged in that work, and not expect once you hire that BIPOC person for them to be your go-to for all that work. So I'll stop there and see if Christina would like to share some thoughts.
Thanks, Dr. Bright. So I too wanted to talk a little bit about the whole casting a wide net with job ads. Here in Wake County Public Libraries, I will say that this is work that we've been doing probably with a lot of intention for the past year to year and a half. And so we did rely on just the regular sites, and we have branched out to try to target our job ads where people of color will see them, like BCALA. I will just mention, though, it's maybe not accessible to everybody because of the cost, especially for a public library. Unless you have a budget for job ads, it's really expensive to post on some of those sites. But if you can get your administration to support you in that, it really is, I think, important to push some budget that way. Also, I agree with Dr. Bright about looking at the job interview process. This is something that we really did in the past year, and especially with in Wake County Libraries, the higher in the organization you go, the wider it gets. And so we have really tried to take some of that bias, as Dr. Bright was talking about, out of the process by looking at our process and changing some of the ways, especially when we're hiring managers. We in Wake County Public Libraries went to a nominating and hiring committee to hire managers, and we're bringing in for those positions staff of different, trying to make a more diverse interview panel for those positions, not just in race or ethnicity, but in gender, in position levels. We've got managers, librarians, library assistants. So really trying to open that up to get different perspectives, different opinions, and just, people who we're all coming with our own biases, but if you can open up that panel and get more voices heard, then maybe you're more likely to choose the person of color rather than what you're kind of wanting to go to. I will say too, paying attention to the wording of the job ad is important. trying to make it more inclusive. I've really tried to start, looking at how we're wording our job ads. And, if you've got a DEI statement, either for your organization or whatever, maybe include that. Look at how you're represented in, how you represent yourself to the community. I talk to the members of I have a DEI subcommittee that I'm on, and I really talked to the members of my committee and asked them their opinions on these questions, because I was like, I'm not qualified to answer these on my own. And so I want to recognize Tristan Ebron, who was one of our adult services librarians, Emily Graney, who was one of our full-time library assistants, and Sergio Costa de Araujo, who was one of our part-time library assistants. And they were able to help me look at these questions and say that, one thing that the library system has to do is prove that you're genuinely supporting different communities. And that has to be reflected in your online presence, the programming that you're offering, the collections on your shelves, the way you're representing your library. You have to represent all of the different communities to be able to attract diverse candidates. And then just lastly, I wanted to say that when it comes again to the interviewing or to the recruitment, this is something that I really hadn't thought of a whole lot until more recently, is that, we have a lot of internal candidates and we get a lot of external candidates. The internal candidates will always have that benefit of being the internal candidate. They know more. So if you're trying to bring more BIPOC candidates and attract more and hire more, then really being more equitable with the information that you're sharing with your candidates, making sure that, you can't share all the information with them, but if you can put together at least enough information that they're coming into the interview with at least, try to level the playing field for everybody so that they can speak to the job just as competently as somebody maybe who's already in the job. Because it does, if you're always just hiring from the inside, if your organization is, mostly white and you're trying to hire people of color, if you're just then promoting the people from within, then you're just kind of perpetuating that cycle. So.
All right, here is our next question. So once BIPOC professionals are hired, how can libraries ensure that they feel supported, valued, and have opportunities for growth within the organization? That kind of touches on what Christina mentioned about room for advancement within the organization. What initiatives, or programs have proven successful in creating inclusive work environments? What role does mentorship play in retaining staff? And we'll have Kawanna lead us off for this.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to focus on two things here. One is the bait and switch, and the other is the importance of mentoring. So what I mean by bait and switch is that, and we've all seen a little bit of this, when you interview, typically everyone's on their best behavior. That's what you're supposed to do for an interview. So they're showing you their best side. They're not going to show you any of the ugly spots that might exist, which is fine. You expect there always to be some surprises when you get to work. But what we typically hear from a lot of BIPOC is that it turns from a few ugly spots to being like the entire apple is rotten to the core. And when they get there, they're finding out that all these things that were said or promised or talked about when they ask questions about things like collaboration and the types of support available are not there. Surprisingly, they're gone all of a sudden. And that's very disappointing. There's actually an aspect of this called psychological contracts, which we're not going to go into, but it's something that actually happens to all employees in many cases, where you're promised something. And so in your brain, you're going to work to the level of what was promised to you. And then when that contract is broken by your organization, it impacts your effort. It also impacts your joy in your work. So there's this need to make sure that you're not over-promising what your organization is or what's going to be provided to those coming into that position. So if you're telling them there's going to be a mentoring program, a structured mentoring program, there needs to be a structured mentoring program, not something you haphazardly put together once they get there and say, oh, okay, I guess we should find you a mentor. That's not how that's supposed to work. If you're promising them that there's funding and that funding is for professional development, and all of a sudden they're not getting funding for professional development, or that funding is going to others but not to them, that's another break of the contract. So now they're feeling unsupported and they need that professional development. One thing we're definitely seeing from the data, including looking at the quantitative data, is that professional development is important. Being able to continue growing in your job is important. If you remove that from the job satisfaction is going to go down, and then people don't want to continue existing in that workplace. But let's also focus specifically on that mentoring piece. You want a strong mentoring program. You want something that's already in place and something that has been assessed in terms of how well is it working for everyone involved. But you want to make sure that those involved in the mentoring program are there for the right reasons. So there's this aspect of mentorship that's often considered to be forced mentorship. So people who've been in an organization for quite some time are paired up, buddied up with someone who's brand new, and that person is not prepared to be a good mentor. That person isn't there for the right reasons to be a good mentor, which is a disservice to the new person coming into the organization. Sometimes it's okay to, especially when you're talking about BIPOC professionals, get them a mentor who's not in the library. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with having mentors who are external to the institution, external to the organization, as long as that person is there for the right reasons. So oftentimes what we've learned from talking to the BIPOC professionals is that goes back to what Monica was saying, this isolation. Not feeling they had anyone to talk to, not feeling there was anyone that if they ran into issues with microaggressions or gaslighting, that they had someone to talk to, that they felt safe talking to. And typically that's what a good mentor is for that person. And so sometimes there's value of having a mentor outside of the organization because that safety level comes up immediately. You want someone that they know they can go to. And sometimes it's just venting. Let's all be honest. We have to vent sometimes. It's okay to need to vent, but you also need someone there who has a good ear and who has the ability to say, this is beyond venting. This is a problem for you. This is something that's actually happening in the workplace that should not happen. And they need someone who can help them with solutions. So focus on building a really strong mentoring program. Be prepared to train people to be mentors. It's not a skill that's automatically ingrained in anyone. You actually have to work at it just like you do anything else. And it's okay to gather mentors who are external to your organization, who are just willing to be there and support someone professionally as well. And I think we'll turn it over to Monica, see if you have some thoughts, or actually, no, turn it over to Christina. I'm keeping my order straight today.
Thank you. I like what Dr. Bright was saying about that mentor program. That's something that we're trying to build or will be building in Wake County Public Libraries, because I think to date it has been more of that informal. I think it has been helpful. I heard from my some of my peers that having a mentor really does makes it easier to come into the organization and makes you feel comfortable. But it does need to be more formalized because it has been haphazard. I think another way that, providing those opportunities for growth within the organization is what we've been trying to do here in Wake County Public Libraries are thinking about a lot too, is we're a very flat organization. We don't have a whole lot of levels. We have library assistant, librarian, manager, and then senior manager, and then pretty much the director. So, I think we need to create some more career paths for people. Not everybody wants to be a manager. That's not everybody's wheelhouse is supervising people or managing, managing a building. So creating more career paths for people, I think it's important, including different staff at all levels on committees and projects to give them that opportunity to build their leadership skills, because I think that's one thing that we do find when we're interviewing and trying to hire for managers. They get so focused on doing the task of a manager that they forget that those leadership skills are so important. And so figuring out ways that they can be involved on different committees or projects, making sure that their voices can be heard and to help build those leadership skills. One project that we have in the works right now, I'm not personally involved in it, but I think it's just going to be a wonderful opportunity for people, is that we've been working on a grant in Wake County Public Libraries. It's an IMLS grant called the Molly Houston Lee Scholars Grant. And it is going to fund graduate school for the next generation of librarians with a focus on our BIPOC full-time library assistants. So it's growing our own librarians. This project is being led by Valerie Pierce, who is the library manager of our Wake Forest Public Library. She's also the chair of our library's DEI committee. And the exciting thing is we're going to be partnering with NC Central and ECU on this project. And it's really, again, we were talking earlier, right at the beginning, the study that Dr. Bright and Dr. Colón-Aguirre were talking about of trying to increase the enrollment of BIPOC students in our LIS programs. Because until I think we can get more people enrolled in programs that, it's just down future generations, it's going to have, that effect. So I think doing this kind of program will be really beneficial. So, and with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Colón-Aguirre.
Thank you. So one of the things that I think it's important here, before we even start like the conversation about what should we give our BIPOC candidates, we need to be honest. How welcoming is the environment we're bringing our BIPOC candidates into? I worked in an institution once who brought they had to bring in a consultant to do some research. And what this person found was that BIPOC were having a really hard time in this particular place because it was a culture issue. So the culture was not supporting diversity, equity, or inclusion. And one of the things she said just like struck with me, and it still like sticks with me today. She said, what good is it to bring in people in a house that's already on fire? You need to put out the fire, and when it's safe, then start bringing in people. Otherwise, you're just feeding brown and black bodies to the fire. And I was like, oh, that is big words. So truly think how welcoming is the environment in which you work. And I do special here a call for managers and administrators. Think about how welcoming is the place where you work of BIPOCs, of difference, just not just BIPOC, of just regular good old difference and diversity. And be careful. The people who you're bringing in, those BIPOC candidates, might need protection from patrons and from their colleagues. So you have to really have an honest conversation with yourself. I say it's a self-reflection kind of issue. And if you're really committed to diversity, you have to, in many cases, intervene for the well-being of your BIPOC employees. Another thing that has been mentioned is mentorship, and mentorship can be really useful. In other cases, it might not. It might turn into ugly. So in some cases, these formalized programs, you have to be very careful how it's been mentioned here. The person needs to be basically trained in some cases. So I would recommend have training for mentors. A lot of people are not ready for the responsibility of mentorship. In one of my jobs, I was assigned a mentor, and she just told me to leave the profession because that was her conclusion. It's like, okay, this person was running when I was already on my 5th year. So it was almost like, oh, we promised you a mentor and we never gave it to you. So here it is. And this person then was like, oh yeah, you're not good at this. Just, get out while you can. And it's like, yeah, I'm still here. So no, I'm good at this. But you have to be very, very careful. In some cases, the best mentorship relationship will come from people finding themselves. So, but you have to also give your candidates the opportunity to look for those people that they just get along well with, or those people who reach out to them and they feel comfortable working with. So that also is important. So in the effort of formalizing mentorship roles, which is actually the research shows it's better to have a formalized program, don't turn it into a straitjacket. So keep it flexible. And as a manager, I always encourage people to keep an eye out on how the BIPOC candidates or the BIPOC employees are being treated in general, because it might be that it's going to require your intervention. And I have so many things to say, but in the interest of time, I'm going to stop there.
Thank you so much, Monica. This next question is, what can library professionals do to ensure that their administrators and hiring committees are promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion? And we'll have Christina lead us off for this one.
Thanks, Devin. I think one of the most important things that library professionals can do is get to a place where you're comfortable having tough conversations with people. When I joined, when we formed our DEI committee about a year and a half ago, I mean, that was one of the things that Valerie, our chair, was very much like, these are going to be a lot of tough conversations, and you have to be ready for that. So I think being able to have tough but honest conversations with your administrators. I had talked a little bit before about the hiring committees. You know, we've gone to a nominating and then a hiring committee and everything. So I'll focus on the administrator piece. But I think that along with being comfortable having those tough conversations, you have to look for ways to give your feedback when or not even just when asked, but if staff surveys go out about how you're feeling. Like, we have staff engagement surveys, they're all anonymous, but you have to fill them out and be very honest about how you feel about the work environment, about your how you feel your library administration is doing with these kinds of topics, how your supervisor is. Do you feel like it's a welcoming environment? So really being honest, talking to your coworkers. Dr. Colón-Aguirre just mentioned about, sometimes you have to, if it's not a welcoming environment and you're having to sort of navigate these relationships with people that even your coworkers, you're not always, who are not always maybe on their best behavior. I think a lot of training is involved too, trying to make sure that your administrators understand how important that training is, to push for that training. We're part of the larger Wake County government, and so there is a lot of training on DEI and other topics to help just staff and managers understand how important diversity, equity, and inclusion is. And then too, I think just advocating to be included in different things like hiring committees and interview panels. Volunteer when you're given that opportunity. Don't assume that somebody else is going to do it. Step up and help. And then, I think just the more we do that, the more then people will understand how important this work is. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bright.
I think my mentality here is always along the lines of see something, say something. I mean, for me, it's if I see something is not making sense to me, if I'm watching this process from the inside or the outside, I always at least try to raise it as a question, like, are we missing a step here? Are we forgetting something? Did we not acknowledge X, Y, and Z? I had a very negative experience on a search committee once where my role turned into, I just saw something bad, we can't do that, right? That was the whole mentality, where the majority of the rest of the committee was just so focused on this one candidate who was not qualified and had, but they had a relationship, there were things going on. And it really turned into this negative process. But the hard part for me was staying in that, like holding steady to the fact that I saw something wrong and I wasn't going to be party to the continued process of this action. And so it wound up actually being elevated up to the dean to that point. And that was the process. I could not, because I could have easily, as a junior faculty member, said, I am not getting involved in this. These were senior faculty members who had tenure. And I could have very easily said, I can't do this, but I just could not sit there and watch it happen, because it was a continuation of the negativity of how hiring processes happened in the past, where unqualified people were elevated for personal reasons rather than the qualified people, regardless of their identities and backgrounds. So definitely see something, say something. take every opportunity that you have. If there are surveys being sent out after a search and you've had a chance to meet a candidate, please express your thoughts on that candidate, whether it's positive or negative, but make sure your voice is heard in that process. Kind of as Christina was saying, be involved, be engaged, because there is this level of sometimes needing another person to break the tie, right? Everyone's kind of moving along, everything's going along the way it always has. And if no one ever stands up and says, we need to stop doing this, then there's no reason to stop doing it. And I will say, excuse me, make sure you maintain your safety. I do not want to sit here and pretend like this is easy to do. And then in some situations, you may simply not feel comfortable doing it. But I think for most of us, if you truly feel in your gut, which is what I was feeling, nauseous about the process, I just couldn't watch that, because I just kept thinking of, this is how I feel now, how I feel if this person is hired, and it turns into a negative situation for my organization. So definitely, if you feel comfortable doing so, speak up. Or if you have that mentor, that person you can talk to who might have the ear of someone else, at least share your discomfort or your concerns, so that administration is paying attention, so that the hiring committees are paying attention, and that it doesn't become that continuous internal process where no one else is included. Monica?
So this comes to be proof that Kawanna and I share a brain, because I was thinking the exact same thing, and I was going to say, see something, do something. So Kawanna, like, we've been working on so long that we already share, you have half my brain and I have half yours. But one of the things that I will add here is, all those beautiful statements that we're putting out all the time, those DEI statements that we like plaster everywhere on our website, and then you ask about them and nobody knows where they are or like remember seeing them. And many places don't even know they have one. This is the time to bring them over. I read once an article, it was from the management literature, but that's what this, every time a committee would convene to write the description of a position, or write, or actually start the process of selecting candidates for interview, they would start the meeting reading their diversity and equity and inclusion statements to remind themselves of the values of the organization. These statements are usually put out as and presented in the literature as they're being hollowed and not really having any value. That's their value. So it should be a reminder, and it should be something that is brought in at specific times. And I think one of the things I would recommend, in addition to what's already been said, is start those meetings before by reviewing your own diversity, equity, and inclusion statements at the institution, or in some cases, even your mission and your values, to help you guide the process. Because I'm very sure because I've reviewed plenty of them for research purposes, most of them already have actual information about what are the expectations around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's a good reminder for the people who are sitting on those committees, this is your charge. So move forward, and these are your values. So I will stop that there.
All right, now we have our fourth question, which is, in addressing systemic challenges, what steps can libraries take to dismantle barriers and promote inclusivity in hiring, promotion, and leadership positions for BIPOC professionals? How can libraries actively contribute to broader systemic changes in the library profession? And that kind of gets at what Dr. Bright and Dr. Colón-Aguirre were mentioning earlier about how candidates are brought into organizations, and then certain projects or core responsibilities of their job with promoting inclusion are then reaching these roadblocks. And so for this question, we'll have Kawanna lead us off.
And this, of course, is the toughest question for us to handle, because we're starting to think about the very structure of our organizations. And if you start talking about dismantling barriers, then you're really talking about dismantling our organizations. And in many ways, we almost have to do that. We have to rethink how we have historically structured, especially academic libraries. We are very hierarchical. We are very non-communicative. We like to pass things down from the top to the bottom, and there's no understanding of why or the reasons things are being done. There's a lack of voices being heard throughout the process for everyone involved. And so really one of the first things we can do is break that, like create a more inclusive way for the entire organization to communicate about the organizational culture, to communicate about the organization's missions, their values and goals, to make sure that it's also not done in a performative way, that we check the box because we had a staff development session that lasted for 3 hours and it was great and there was food. That's great, but that doesn't mean that you have invited people into the process and then started to make change that would allow others to be successful as well. I also feel that one of the other break is how we actually hire in LIS or in our libraries. I went through way too many, very long interview processes for academic libraries in particular that were draining and non-conducive to anything the gauntlet. And oftentimes surviving that gauntlet did mean that I was asked inappropriate questions for someone who was a person of color, and meant that I had to smile and respond in appropriate ways. And at the end of that, the emotional labor behind that is enough to make you not want to work in that location. Now, the good news was it was a nice red flags. Appreciated it, but that's not the way hiring should work. Hiring should be done in a way that's supportive of all people, and this is regardless of identities. This is not just about being BIPOC. Not everybody can endure a full day interview. Not everybody can travel for interviews. Not everyone can wait 6 months to be reimbursed for an $800 plane ticket, and I'm talking about experience there, because you just didn't come up, or they just, we dropped the ball somewhere. That doesn't work for a lot of candidates, let alone BIPOC candidates who simply don't have that extra funding sitting there waiting. So we've got to, in many ways, rethink how we go about this process of hiring, of bringing people in, of including people in the process of leading our organizations, and also stop worrying about labeling positions based on leadership. Leadership can happen from anywhere. Train everyone to become a leader, include everyone in leadership, and you'll have a more successful organization. So in terms of contributing to the broader system, there are some libraries out there doing great work, but they're not talking about it. And we spend a lot of time publishing how we did good. We love those articles, but they tend to be on things that are very much based on things like instruction and reference, which is great, but no one's talking about how the entire organization did something really good, because there's not really an avenue for producing that. They're just doing the work. So we do need to spend a little more time talking about that. How did you get over the hump? How did you break down the barriers? How did you actually start rebuilding your organization in a positive way? So that would be my 2 suggestions. And I think, Mónica, are you up next?
Yes. So I will say, regarding this question, one of the things that I would say is in many organizations, and I mean libraries particularly, but I see it a lot, especially in academic libraries more than anything, this measure of success of how many BIPOCs we hired. And I want to refocus that, because it's not hiring, it's how many did we retain? How many were able to stay the longest that we have kept here? How many have moved on to positions of power and leadership? Not pushed, but they wanted to move on into it. How many directors of color are there in the institution? And that in many cases, the library. How many coordinators of programming do you have who are BIPOC? So in this case, bringing people in is not even putting the foot on the door, to be honest. At this point, just measuring success by, and I've heard this, it's like, oh, the last 5 people we brought are African Americans. We're doing great with diversity. Well, yeah, after 1 year or 2 years, how many remained? And we have to come with the admission that in certain locations, in certain places, it's going to be extremely difficult. Even if the library is a great place and it offers the BIPOC candidate a possibility to thrive, the community itself is going to be uncomfortable and the people are not going to stay. because we have interviewed people that told us, oh, the work was great, but I don't want to stay living there. It was a massive disaster living in that one location. So we have to start these kinds of issues about, contributions, bringing down barriers to being realistic. And we're no longer in the game of bringing people in. Remember what I mentioned, this person, the evaluator that my program brought in said, what good is it to keep bringing people into a burning house? You're actually not doing them any favors. So it's the health and the success of the program, it's measured and should be measured in retention, not just on bringing people in. So that's what I will add to this, and I will pass it out to Christina. You get to close off the conversation, Christina.
I'll just add a couple of things because I know we want to open this up to questions from all of our participants too. But I think one of the first things in addressing the systemic challenges is to acknowledge that they exist in your organization. And it, you just have to do it. You have to acknowledge that that problem exists. And then you have to create a plan and have goals and be intentional to take some tangible steps in not just your hiring practices, but your promotion and your retention practices. So yeah, that's what I'll close with.
All right, folks, we have time for questions. So I know we had a couple come in the chat.
Yeah, I was responding to some since I was listening with one ear and typing with the other. So be happy to expand on a couple of things as well. I know one of the questions was about why was it so expensive to post to, because I was posting information about BCALA and a few of the ethnic caucuses. And I learned how expensive it was myself when I was going through the process of trying to post. And for BCALA, the cheapest one is actually close to $500. There's multiple options and they extend up to $1,000. The last position we posted here at ECU, we were only given $1,200 total for the entirety of the search process. And that included bringing someone to campus. So you can imagine if you're trying to fly someone into Greenville, North Carolina, it's not the cheapest option usually, depending where they're at. And we weren't going to have enough to post to all the caucuses. And the reason they started charging, to be honest with you, and this is from, my conversations with others, in the past, members of these different caucuses would be asked to post jobs to their listservs because you had to be a member. And a lot of people who, of course, were not members because they figured, I'm not a member of this group, I can't be a member. Anyone can join BCALA. Anyone. You don't have to be someone who identifies as Black or African American to be a member of any of the ethnic caucuses. If you would like to support the work they're doing, you can become a member and have access to the resources and also participate in their work. But before this, the assumption was, well, I'm not a member. We obviously don't have anyone on staff who is in any of these caucuses, which is already a red flag for the organization. They had to start asking other people if they wouldn't mind posting on their behalf. And what was happening is people were applying for those jobs because it was almost like a recommendation from BCLA that, this is a place to work. The person would apply for the job, get there and realize that there was no support for them, that they really didn't feel welcome there. And it would come back to BCLA that, hey, why did you, encourage me to take this job? There was no active encouragement. It's just this, it's a psychological thing. And so to make sure that membership was not being taken advantage of, there's a need to charge and to also continue supporting the organization. You're asking them to do work on your behalf. They should be paid to do that work on your behalf. And so that's really why many of them did start charging fees. I don't know why the structure is so expensive for BCLA. I was not part of that conversation. Others I know don't charge as much, but it could just be different priorities or different people running the group or different number of members. You can definitely reach out and ask them sometime. But I do encourage people to recognize that you need a budget to be able to do this work. If you're going to ask other people to do your work for you, you need to pay them and support that as well.
And I also just saw the question about the training for mentors. Usually, like Kawanna mentioned in her comment, that I've always relied on the internal things. So at institutions, at libraries, they have at the central office, somebody will have information about that, so reach out to them first. If you are in a university, in many cases, management departments, and in some cases, the education department, especially the ones that have programs on assessment, they are likely to have somebody who already is doing that work, and it's internal to the institution. If you have a university nearby, you can also check through them to see if they have somebody who already has something ready. If not, do your research. I encourage you to go out there. There are a lot of resources online that are just available for free. The Society for Human Resource Management used to have a very robust page where they allowed put up a lot of their information for free, and you can actually tailor make one for yourself, for your institution, according to the needs of your institution. So the possibilities are endless. And you would have to determine also what you need. What are the needs on your institution? Is this a case of you need mentorship 101? So people need to learn what are the trappings of being a mentor. And by the way, mentorship goes beyond teaching people where the bathrooms are and where the cafeteria is. So that's actually quite useful. And yes, that's part of the being unsettled the first few months at work is you don't know where the bathrooms are. You're not even sure where all the bathrooms are. But mentorship goes way beyond those basic directional issues. So to encompass even the cases of personal issues. So, so this is something that you would have to see where your institution is and what are the needs of the institution. And you can harness already existing programs, or you might need to create something from the information that is available. The good news is with the internet having so much information out there, there are resources that can be used. And sorry, my cat wants to say hi.
That's totally okay. Oh my gosh. Leah has a really good point in the chat. I'm frustrated because my library is following all of these steps, at least on the surface, and it hasn't resulted in any real BIPOC diversity to our library. They seem to follow the rules, but the best person is still not the BIPOC person. Kind of seems to be a situation where like the words aren't feeling like they're aligning with any sort of actions. So I know Kawanna added in the chat, but Monica and Christina, any thoughts on this?
That's actually not uncommon. I always tell people, and there's an academic called Marianne Gassman who wrote a piece. It was about BIPOC in faculty and institutions. And the article was, the title was, "Why don't we have BIPOC faculty?" And she wrote down, honestly, because we don't want them. So in some cases, I've even sat down and started thinking, maybe this is seen as a strength in some cases, this lack of diversity. Maybe that's why these institutions are thriving, because they're kind of like on the surface, yeah, let's bring diversity. But diversity, equity, and inclusion takes work. Takes a lot of work, takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of very uncomfortable conversations. And most people that I've met are not ready for these conversations. So in most cases, if there's a lot of lip service to we want all this diversity and there's this chronic problem with diversity, it's a problem of commitment. I wouldn't go that far, too far. So it's like, do you really, and I wrote a paper called that, do you really want a diverse program? And in this case, do you really want diversity in your workplace? It puts you in a place of discomfort. And that comes from a white passing Latina. Even for me, the conversations get uncomfortable. So we have to learn to live with the discomfort that these true conversations bring.
Absolutely. Christina, any thoughts?
I'm just again going back to you know, maybe the makeup of the interviewing panels, you know, if Leah's organization can, you know, can those be expanded to include other people? Because if it's the same people on these interviewing panels, and you're going to get the same results every time, and you've got to shake that up. it's not 100% that that'll work, because you do, again, depending on the power structure, because if you've got the, someone who's got a higher power than other people on the panel, they could certainly influence that hiring decision. But I think it does, it does make a difference when you've got that diverse, truly diverse panel, even if it has to be a big, like we've 5, 6, 7 people on our panels. For library managers, to really, and you've, again, not just the lip service, as you said, but really committing to it, and and to do something different, and not just do the same old. And I know that's hard. It is the hard conversations, and beyond that, though, it's I wish you luck, because it is hard.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Leah. The search committees do change, but I think elite institutions are slow to change, or maybe even acknowledge that change should happen. We are at time. I cannot thank Christina, Dr. Bright, and Dr. Colón-Aguirre enough for being here. I hope that we can do a follow-up session in the future. I definitely am inspired and furiously took notes. Going to read Marion Gassman later. So it's such a pleasure to learn from you all. Folks, keep an eye out for that follow-up email this evening. And I will also include in that email a survey. So any suggestions for the future, potential topics that NC Live should be covering in our training offerings, would love to hear that. But for now, have a great rest of your Monday. Thanks, y'all.